want a temperature.
Something called the summer
adjusting.
solstice.
It's past.
It's residual.
Oh, I know how to do that now. Cut the glass.
Well, independent of the weather and all the other things, there is a new Village Voice out, which got all kinds of new stuff on the continuing cases that theoretically we all should be interested in. Here's a fairly nice panoramic view of Kuwait after the war.
Wow.
Which is kind of an interesting view of what we ended up theoretically. Can you get a shot of that if I hold it still?
Sure.
It is basically something you would expect out of a very morbid movie about a future, maybe out of the Canticles, the Canticle for Leibowitz, I think it was, where they talked about a life after an atomic war.
There's quite a few Arabic publications coming from that area that have full-blown color pictures of all that. I've got some Arabic friends and I've seen a lot of that, and it is really ugly and incredibly scary. I'll try to bring a copy next time.
Yeah, that would be useful because this, has anybody seen any kind of photo coverage here in the United States that's even approximately like
Spotlighted.
Well, yeah, Spotlight, but I'm talking about Oregonian or Time or Life or, you know, all of the usual whatevers.
Well, I didn't see it, but I read the Nation's review of the People magazine commemorative issue of the war, and they said the only casualties they showed were Kurds that got gassed before in the past and a Kurd.
Which, if everybody remembers, the Army, the U.S. Army War College had a report that indicated, in fact, that gassing of the Iraqi Kurds was not done by Iraq, it was done by Iran. Well, that story sort of went into the memory hole, and it's never been seen since. The interesting thing about that picture, and some of the reportage is beginning to seep out through these, you know, like the Spotlight or the Village Voice or, you know, not mainstream media, is, would you believe, Scientific American, July 1991, where, you know, why are data from Kuwait being withheld? There's a half-page article talking about how the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration is suppressing information on the soot that is collecting at their observation base at Mauna Hawaii. And as of March, they were getting soot deposits in Hawaii. And that, of course, would have been before the Kuwaiti oil fields were torched off. And so that would have been probably coming from Iraqi facilities that had been hit by U.S. Aircraft or missiles. But this whole article is talking explicitly about how all of the agencies, for instance, the EPA, were monitoring the smokes from the fire. But all of a sudden, they, according to Mary J. Mears, EPA spokesperson, quote, "We don't want them talking to the press." That is, all of the EPA officials have been effectively silenced. All of the EPA scientists who have been working on reports on this have now been put on essentially administrative gag order. And it goes on, the outfit, you know, another one that is involved in trying to analyze this, Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory, they're also being kept under wraps, so they can't talk about it. Then the Defense Nuclear Agency has been involved in the same thing, and the National Resources Defense Council got some information under a FOIA filing, and it said that the Iran experienced repeated black rain events starting January 22. Well, the kind of damage that's being done environmentally is obviously being very systematically suppressed. But the kicker is in the last paragraph where it says that the officials in the State Department and the Pentagon have privately told him that they are concerned about revelations which will spur demands that Saddam Hussein be tried for environmental war crimes.
Oh, yeah.
Well, of course, that is what they were told. Of course, the thing is, if in fact there were a trial, what would immediately happen is you would discover that the oil fields in Kuwait had not been fired off by the Iraqis, but had in fact been set off by U.S. Air Force cluster bombs, probably dropped from B-52s, because there was a saturation bombing of the Kuwaiti oil fields by the U.S. Air Force. And that's why they don't want any damn trials, because NPR had a report from Kuwait, which now they don't have any reports, but the reporter said that the firefighters are having a real problem because of the unexploded cluster bombs. Well, in subsequent reports, cluster bomb has been deleted. From unexploded ordnance is the latest official terminology.
Just change the language and then nobody knows, right?
Well, when they said cluster bomb, of course, they gave the whole game away because there's only one side using cluster bombs, because only one side had operational aircraft. Those are airdropped munition. They are not provided otherwise. So the reason they don't want any environmental trials is precisely because it would put George Bush and all the wonderful folks that brought to the war in serious, shall we say, under seriously bad repute, because they're the ones who did it. And, you know, even though it is hot and muggy and everybody would prefer to be off probably near water where they could jump in and cool off, these kinds of problems will not go away. We just had the resignation of Thurgood Marshall from the Supreme Court. Everybody's aware of that, I presume.
It's followed a very great loss.
How about having had your entire life work canceled?
About right.
It's kind of interesting. There's a Lanny last seminar brought this up, and I got a copy of the article from him. It's by Stephen Reinhardt. The High Court exposes its right-wing activism. He is a judge in the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, which means he's one step below the Supreme Court in terms of ranking in the judicial system. And he talks about how the Supreme Court is essentially abrogating the Bill of Rights in its entirety. And he goes through a number of very specific complaints about this court, which is essentially abolishing the writ of habeas corpus. There's a ruling, I think it's what is called McCleskey 2 decision, and it limits the right of a death row inmate to challenge the constitutionality of their sentence, and they can only challenge once, even if after they challenge they discover that in fact the state had withheld information exculpatory, i.e. it would have resulted in a not guilty verdict for the accused. They cannot file a second appeal bringing forward the new information that would in fact prove even a criminal conspiracy on the part of the state to frame them. They cannot file a second writ under the new ruling.
What about new evidence other than that? Just
Well, it says that they have only one right of filing a writ of habeas corpus, and it doesn't provide except in cases of, except for.
like somebody walked forward and said, I admit to something or other.
Well, what they did is they put together a committee headed by the former Supreme Court Justice Lewis Powell, and they came up with a report that basically changed fundamental tenets of due process and constitutional practice and the applicability of the Bill of Rights, and essentially negated them. And he comes to the conclusion that the conservative majority has overturned decades of civil rights rulings, eliminated fundamental deterrents to unlawful police practices, gutted the long-standing protection of religious practices by persons other than those belonging to a major religion, sanctioned the invasion of the bedroom and the criminalization of homosexual conduct, and proclaimed his eagerness to overturn the right to abortion as soon as one more vote can be garnered. That's reading verbatim. Certainly, today's court majority is no believer in judicial precedent, nor does it follow the doctrine of judicial restraint or strict construction. A far different term from conservative is needed to describe the activist right-wing majority which is rewriting U.S. constitutional law in its own image.
He just won't say it.
Well, he gets real close to saying it, doesn't he?
Very, very close.
Starts with F.
Uh-huh.
Fascism.
Faces, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's the way. Yeah, that's the right word. It's fascism. That's right.
Well, if we change the word, that changes it, right?
And his last paragraph, whatever that term may be, the judicial and political ideology that drives the current Supreme Court does not portend well for individual rights or fundamental freedoms in these United States. That to me is a pretty strong statement from a sitting federal judge. That, is sort of the antithesis of Pat Buchanan, the guy who never met a Nazi he didn't like. Did everybody see today's piece by Buchanan? Well, he's got, this bit about, how much longer can the left deny to Republicans and conservatives the legitimate political fruit of 3 successive presidential landslides? Not much longer. Now,
They keep saying it, it'll be true.
please remember Adolf Hitler was elected. Please remember October surprise.
Are we getting closer, Ace, do you think, because of what George is doing? Are we getting closer to the time that the net drops on it?
Well, it's kind of interesting. The material in the new issue of Village Voice has some really fascinating stuff on the October surprise, and I don't know if you've been following the people who are major players, but there's a chronology here which is done by Frank Snepp, Curtis Lang, and Dan Vishkoff. Well, Snepp is a former high-ranking CIA official who has in fact been sued by the CIA for his book, Decent Interval. They tried to stop publication. And so he has been, developing a lot of this information. And in fact, he was one of the defense witnesses in the Brennicky trial. I don't know if people remember that, but he in fact was one of the defense witnesses who basically said that he didn't personally know Brennicky to be working for CIA, but that he, as a high-ranking CIA official, had many times in his career hired people on a temporary basis as part-time operatives, as et cetera, and that all of Brennicky's representations were perfectly consistent with known CIA procedures, and that nothing that Brennicky said seemed at all implausible or unbelievable on its face. It was just sort of the normal kind of thing that happened with a person who had been working with CIA on a contract basis over a number of years. So anyway, he has been involved in a number of major cases, which now that he's targeting in on October Surprise, along with a number of other significant people, and Blafus is after that, you know, on a regular basis. His newest, this is June 26 to 29 issue of In These Times, has all kinds of interesting stuff, including more possible meeting places. He's got now Paris and Madrid, which we already knew about, but he's added Zurich and possibly Frankfurt for meeting places of the October Surprise crew out of the Reagan administration, or at that time campaign. And there, you know, are other reporters from other countries, and Christopher Hitchens has been all over this, you know, for years. And now Martin Killian of Der Spiegel is going into it on a regular basis. Plus we have the London Economist. In fact, they're now working with Nightline with Ted Koppel, and they're bringing a lot of the material out. And then we've got Gary Sick, you know, who's a former Navy captain and NSC official. And there is so much happening, and it's happening in so many places. When I keep saying that this is a coup in process, and you should watch it the same way, you know, you go to a theater. You go into a theater, you buy your ticket. You know what you're doing. You're not just pretending like this is the real world, and it's all real out there. If you see it as a drama, as a play, you then read things a little differently, and you can critique the, you know, the acting, the directing, the script writer. I mean, you can start becoming, if you will, a theater critic, and you can look at it from a slightly different perspective if you're going to see the show as a critic. I mean, if you go in there and you look at it and you think it's real, then of course you're going to be very naive in the way you interpret things. For instance, this last column by Blafus has a fascinating thing. Have you heard about the Fund for New Priorities in America? You hear about that outfit?
Fund for New Priorities?
Fund for.
Sounds funny.
Well, it's an interesting outfit because they're the ones that did the 3-hour CNN program on October Surprise. Anybody see that, the CNN program? Well, they had Blafus, they had Hitchens, they had all the major reporters that are digging into the case on the panel. And in fact, I called the Washington office, and they're supposed to send me a transcript as soon as one is available. But here is a key sentence in here that, if you're there as a theater critic, leaps out and bites you, and you know what you're reading. It says that the Fund for New Priorities in America, New York-based organization, sponsored the June 13 colloquy to provide members of Congress and their staffs with an examination of the evidence and the political implication of the alleged deal. Well, they had a whole bunch of people from the House and the Senate there, you know, listing all these reporters talking about what had been happening, what they had found, the documentation, like Ted Koppel and the London Economist, you know, came up with this little obscure reference in a New York Times article that Bill Casey was out of the country at the time of one of the Madrid meetings. You know, and that there is no documentation of where Casey was during that exact time the meeting was supposedly occurring in Madrid.
That was today's paper.
Well, I'm just talking about what was on Koppel's program a matter of a week ago. See, it's happening, you see, it's like an avalanche. More and more is coming out, and it's accelerating. But let's get down to the next paragraph. This is not the Fund's first attempt to publicly shed light on a brewing scandal. In March 1973, the group sponsored a similar colloquy on the subject of Watergate, the constitutional crisis, Congress versus the executive. Soon thereafter, Congress began holding the Watergate hearings.
Somebody in the fire.
Now, the Fund for New Priorities in America How do you spell CIA again? How do you spell, DIA, DE? I mean, this is a spook operation. Anybody read it any other way?
What still evades me, Ace, is the dissident factions of the spookery of the apparatus. Are they trying to, in the process of dropping a net over Dear George, because they think that he's gone nutso to the right, because they simply want power? None of the above, or all of
Well,
it?
the right and left is what they keep the garden slugs entertained with.
Okay, so then why drop the net over George?
Because if you start reading things like David Saracen and looking at Owen's cartoon, did everybody see this cartoon? Here's the general on the B-2 bomber, the stealth bomber waving 2 bags of money. And here are the black hole SNL guys dancing on the roof, sprinkling money. And George Bush is speaking to these 2 little, ragged waifs in the center, saying, "You want $1,000, you just blow it all anyway." I mean, it's becoming a joke. It's becoming so grotesque. I mean, you now have people like Honeywell Incorporated Chairman James Rayner discussing how children are being destroyed by this culture of greed glands at supernova.
Is it all connected then, as you see it?
It's all connected.
With all these programs that seem somehow to have sprung up from the desert about how the children of America are without medical care, et cetera, et cetera? I mean, all at the same time? No accident about it sort of thing?
Well, did anybody see the latest issue of Harper's? Somewhere in the stack I have a copy of that little piece of Harper's, and there's a very interesting thing. Jack Kemp said there was a sort of a round table discussion with your average bunch of dirtballs and Republicrats and general scumbags and, knuckle draggers. Well, Jack Kemp said that the society cannot survive half in squalor and half in opulence, and that there has to be a Republican solution.
So we can expect to see somebody, somebody who would appear to be attacking all these problems, right?
And FDR shall raised to the occasion, shall be raised to the occasion.
Just as genuine and authentic as...
About as genuine and authentic as FDR was. I mean, he was the most egregious fraud to ever come down the pike, other than possibly Winston Churchill or Adolf Hitler. Please remember, Adolf Hitler was head of the National Socialists. He purportedly represented the proletariat.
No, it wasn't that at all, Ace. I really have to jump in on your head at this point. They put in the word socialist because the people had a gutful of the effects of capitalism, not because he...
I'm saying he was a fraud and a hypocrite. What are you disagreeing with? I'm not saying he was real. I'm saying he was a fraud. I'm saying he was using language and imagery to manipulate the garden slugs. You're not disagreeing with me.
Apparently not.
No, I mean, but it was the National Socialist Party.
Yeah, that wasn't...
I'm not saying that he meant it. That's like saying FDR was a socialist. The hell he was, but he was a rationalist. You see, that's the trade-off. I've been debating this with all kinds of people all over the country now for, I guess, several weeks, months, whatever. And the best people can come up with at this point, not using the classical nomenclature left, right, or you know, Nazi, fascist, you know, capitalist. I mean, those terms have become so absolutely eviscerated of any meaning. Today's Democratic Party would actually qualify in the 19th century as a Tory party. And what we call the Republicans, they didn't even have a name for those people in the 19th century because nobody was that far, nobody had been there since Genghis Khan. I mean, there was no political party replicating the Republicans today because there were liberals and there were conservatives, and the conservatives would now be the Democratic Party. You know, and somebody said that, you know, with Marshall leaving the court, the anchor on the left-hand side has been loosed, and the court is now flapping as far to the right as it cares. Well, I don't know if that imagery is any value anymore because there are too many things that get confused. I think that there's people who believe in fundamental equality. I think that's the important touchstone. People who genuinely believe in equality.
Is this all about maintaining the privilege of the very richest, most powerful people? Is that what it really comes down to?
And there are those who fundamentally believe in aristocracy and a hereditary aristocracy.
And elitism.
Well, it's not merely elitist because actually Jefferson was in favor of what he called the natural aristocracy. But the natural aristocracy started out with everybody even. Everybody started out essentially even without inherited privilege or advantage. So that, let's face it, you do have a basic standard curve in terms of smarts. Some people are brighter than others. And if everybody had an even start, the brighter people would tend to do better than the people who weren't so bright, but at least you wouldn't end up with a Dan Quayle on top. I mean, the only possible explanation for many of the people who are now in extremely high positions is fundamentally that they are either absolutely corrupt to serve the will of the monarch, who then provides them these sinecures of power and position, as was common practice in monarchistic Europe in the 18th century and before. Or they simply inherited it because we have absolute heritability of wealth. In the case of Dan Quayle, if his father had been a bricklayer, no one would even know his name, or would he be the subject of a Quayle Quarterly, or would he be the butt of multitudes of jokes?
I don't know how this ranks in terms of compensation, money made by the people that have the real wealth in the world, but I read in the Mother Jones this issue that the chairman of the Time Warner conglomerate, his compensation package for last year was estimated to be conservatively $71 million, but up to maybe $100 million in 1 year.
Well, now you understand why we always considered Lee Iacocca one of the common men, because he only a real commoner. He only got $6 million this last year. I mean, I just felt I almost wanted to pass the hat. Pretend like this is a secret government. Dr. Nicholson dimes in for Lee Iacocca. He only made $6 million this last year. I mean, I was just my heart was just rended. It was just smashed.
I wonder how he gets by.
How can you make it only, $6 million?
See,
God.
really scraping the barrel.
What Jack Kemp said, as I found it, in other words, a conservative war on poverty is now a moral imperative. This country will not stand as a nation divided between abject poverty and surging affluence. Now that's Jack Kemp speaking, folks. Not me. He has rediscovered, what does somebody do?
Discovering conservative roots.
That's a good paraphrase of Lincoln. Lincoln.
Thank you.
House divided against itself cannot stand.
Get rid of those dissenters.
But the proposition of a conservative war on poverty reminds me a great deal of the final solution.
Yeah.
I mean, what kind of a war on poverty is old Jack talking about? AIDS, tuberculosis, drugs, mandatory imprisonment, smoke 'em, don't choke 'em.
Measure 7 thing.
So, excuse me, are you automatically equating conservative then with right-wing?
No, in this point I am equating conservative as it's used in this country for anybody who is a monarchist, a fascist, a Nazi, a bigot, you know, anti-Semite, you know, misogynist, every kind of nutcake, every kind of person who basically would have been quite at home in the Inquisition as long as they were working with Torquemada.
And they have to
Which
be
the Supreme
liars.
Court, I
They
suspect, is now studying Torquemada's rulings closely. Let's see, I think we can get a confession out of this person if we use an Iron Maiden. Possibly thumb screws will be in vogue. I can see it now. Rehnquist will have the concession on thumb screws. Let's see, what will this new Afro-Aryan they've appointed do? Every honky in Congress will be gutless to the point where he will not say that this is a fascist scumbag and ought not to be let anywhere near a judicial robe.
Is he a fascist scumbag?
Well, he's the guy who, when he was head of the equal, what is it? The
EEOC.
Yeah, EEOC, Equal
Equal Employment Opportunity.
Oh, yeah, right.
Commission. Thank you.
He allowed the cases to lapse.
Well, all he did was let 1,500 cases, 1,000?
15,000.
15,000 cases become legally meaningless by refusing to act until the statute of limitations expires.
Wow.
It's criminal inside.
Or a
Now-
real charmer, huh?
Now, technically, correct me if I'm wrong, doesn't that qualify as malfeasance in office? Isn't that grounds for removal? But who put him in there? Dear old Bonzo's co-star. Everybody remembers Bedtime for Bonzo, the GE flat, the man who brought you the October surprise.
This is probably obvious to you and everyone, but I was sort of ruminating on the fact that now that the Supreme Court is the composition that it's apparently going to be, if you put that with the fact that all of your commissions, whether they be the Labor Relations Board, the EEOC, OSHA, all of them are so packed now with what we call right-wingers, and I kind of agree, that now, so you have the so-called balance of power. All you have left is the legislative body. And
That's about as balanced as an elephant
Yeah, it's not
on
really
skis.
Any guesses? I mean, after this latest guy, this Thomas, gets appointed,
Well, he
are
has
they
been
going to?
nominated. I think he'll probably be confirmed because I don't think the Senate has the guts to ice him.
Well,
Because I don't think they have the integrity.
I want to know if we're in this country going to get back-to-back yard or backroom butchery. Are they going to overturn Roe
Of course
versus
they're going to
Wade?
overturn it.
Oh
You know,
my God,
the
man. Back
thing
to the
is,
40s and 50s.
Well, is it
Wow.
5, 4, 6?
no, but we're not back to the 40s and 50s because, in fact, we now have 80% of the population of the United States has lost economic power in the past decade. In terms of real dollars, the average wage in the United States has gone down consistently year by year from 73 on. The number of people now moving home with their folks has gone up massively. Probably 25% of the young adults are now living at home if they have a home to live in. In the case of New York City, they are now kicking people off the sidewalks where they've been living for the last several years under this world's, you know, longest peacetime economic boom. And they're being kicked into the homeless shelters that are being closed. Right?
They're evicting the homeless, right?
Yeah, they're evicting the homeless. That's true, they are evicting the homeless. How can you evict the homeless?
Come on, man. Come
No,
on.
I'm serious, this is really happening right now in New York City. In fact,
Yeah, they're living in abandoned subway places and whatnot.
there's an article, you know, somebody take a look and find the article. There's an article in the Village
Yeah,
Voice
right.
on that.
That's true.
But they are being evicted to the homeless shelters that Dinkins is closing.
Well, this lady just reminded us that it happened in Portland, too.
We're ahead of New York, remember, they went through the camps and all?
That's right, they destroyed all of the homeless homes in Sullivan's Gulch and,
Well, starting July 1st, 2 days ago, State of Oregon's Medicaid program stopped covering any dental work for anyone between ages of 18 and 65.
between the ages of 18 and 65.
Well, state government is involved in that, right?
Right.
Well, what do you expect in this?
Well, I'm just saying that.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah, man, oh yeah. I expect anything of those slugs in Salem.
And in New York City, you can get a parking space for $260 a month, standard.
What was that?
Yoo-hoo! One conversation at a time. If it's important enough to do, then do it for everybody, or we'll all get totally confused. Would you like to repeat that?
Oh, we were just kind of joking.
Well, but that's, look, there is no humor in the situation we're doing.
18 to 65, we're saying, well, after 65, they figure most people might have dentures or something.
Yeah, they don't need them anyway.
Well, if you don't have any dental work between age 18 and 65, I can almost guarantee you will have dentures.
You don't have any dental work, you don't have any teeth, everything.
Because you won't have any teeth left to deal with.
But did you happen to see in the one of those little squished in news pieces in the Oregonian recently that the state of Oregon has something like enough public relations types to cost the taxpayers of the state $3 to $10 million a year?
Oh, is it 3 to 10? I heard 7 million.
Those dirty, rotten scumballs. I mean, those incredible excuses for Oregonians.
Listen, you've got to understand, the people of Oregon have become so smug and so simply inattentive that they have permitted this essentially to become New Jersey West. If the mob does not own this state, I'd like to know how in the hell it is that they can take a chump and get him convicted of a crime that he didn't commit. All it took was a conspiracy on the part of the Oregon State Police, the governor's office, the legislature, the attorney general's office, the district attorney's office in Marion County, and the complicity and cooperation and connivance of the judge and the defense or the accused. Other than that, there was nobody involved in the conspiracy except for the Oregonian, which has as its chief scribe a person. I had an argument over whether or not he was corrupt or stupid, and somebody said, well, he's born again Christian. I'm going to argue he's stupid.
Who's that, Stanford? Who are you talking about?
Monzano.
Who?
Phil Monzano, not Phil Stanford. Stanford is not reporting the trial. He is the one who is reporting what doesn't get reported.
Okay, that's right.
No.
But I'm saying that there's an argument over whether or not Monzano is merely a egregious sucker up to power who would lick boots or kiss portions of the anatomy or whatever was appropriate to enhance his career options, or whether or not he is in collusion, because I in fact have read reports that I know to be deliberately, willfully falsified, in that I have a copy of Kathy Hardin's letter to his nephew, Swingin' Swain, and Phil Monzano's reportage of what was in that letter was absolutely false. He didn't. Kathy Hardin did not say in the letter that he was offered reward money and freedom. The word reward never appeared in the letter. what was in the letter was, I have been offered freedom and money spelled with $2 signs. The word money wasn't even there, it was $2 signs. In exchange for testifying against that rat Gable. Now, Manzano's reportage of the contents of the letter were absolutely falsified. They, in fact, were not just wrong, they were wrong maliciously, because it made it appear as though these state witnesses were offered the reward money for their testimony in terms of the money that was offered as a reward for information leading to the arrest, conviction, yada yada. But that is a complete falsification, misrepresentation, and as far as I'm concerned, smacks of nothing but sheer propaganda. Now, why he would do that, I cannot state, because I do not know. There are some people who claim that because he's a born-again Christian, obviously he's got a mental problem, which I cannot rebut that theory. I've never known a person who did not have some serious mental problem who had been born again. I've never known I mean, that is a pure, correlation. Those who believe they were born again obviously have some serious mental problem. So I can't discount that theory in its entirety. But when you see something that's systematic, structured, and coherent and occurs over a sustained period of time, moving specifically to accomplish a specific objective, you cannot chalk it up to coincidence, incompetence, or chance. So there's something going on there. So if you have effectively a complete parallel to the Kennedy case, where you have the conspiracy involving intellectual authorship of the crime, the actual mechanics who commit the crime, then you have a massive, sustained, system-wide cover-up of the crime. How can you call it anything other than a state run by organized crime?
Did you hear Kevin Franke today on?
I certainly did, and I would sure he would fully agree with what I just said.
They cut out Wexler was punching the button, the dump button, on every name that was mentioned in reference to alternative.
Well, they dumped a whole lot of names.
Including
I'm
Goldsmiths.
following this now. Can you help me here? Because I didn't hear this.
No, I didn't.
Well, Kevin Franke took 3 hours this morning on KGW. The Right Reverend Weisbud is off vacationing in his native land up north. So when he says, we should do this and we should do that, you tell him to move up where we counts, because he ain't one of us. He came both. Which is what I always find amusing about Weisbud. He seems to think he's more of a Yankee than anybody in the listening audience.
He's a Canuck capitalist.
Actually, he is wired in very tightly with the Heritage Foundation, Hoover Foundation, Van Mises Institute. He's a real slimy character. But anyway, since he was out of town and whatever today, the brother of the late Director of Corrections took his 3 hours with the, what is Wexler's title?
He's the program manager.
Program director.
There's a station manager and a program manager. I believe he's the program manager.
Yeah. Anyway, so Wexler was sitting there, playing with buttons and cutting, censoring the proceedings.
The whole 3 hours was censored. There must have been 15 dumps on that show.
Really?
What was said that was so important?
Every name that was not in the trial.
If I would have called in and said, I would be real interested to know what connection Peterson might have had to the case, given that his testimony was that the window was not broken at 8 o'clock, and the state's case is that Franke was dead at 7, so therefore, since he only lived for 4 minutes after being stabbed in the heart, he would have had to have smashed the window prior to being dead, So therefore, the window had to be broken, and if Peterson was not committing perjury when he so testified, then Frankie wasn't dead at 8 o'clock. Which is a very interesting point, because I talked to one of the investigators for the defense and pointed that out to him, and I didn't have to, he already picked up on it, that in fact Peterson has essentially destroyed the case for the state by basically proving that Frankie was not dead at 8 p.m., which of course means that he wasn't stabbed in the parking lot by Gable at 7.
When do they think he was dead?
Well, I would like to know why the state police refused to permit the state medical examiner to get to the body, physically get to it, for 6 hours after its discovery.
They did not get to it for 6 hours?
The state police took charge of the crime scene from the city police and refused to permit the medical examiner from the coroner's office in Salem to go to the body until after the state police crime lab technicians had arrived there from Springfield, Oregon. Now, the crime lab people didn't get there until 6:30 a.m. The body was discovered at 12:30 a.m. The medical examiner was there at 1 a.m. If the medical examiner had gone to the body and taken his thermostat, placed it into the appropriate orifices of the body, they would have discovered what the body temperature was, because when you kill something, it has a gradient of heat loss. You know the ambient temperature, etc., etc. You know the body temperature at the point of death. Well, you have this nice forensic curve that, you know, remedial forensic criminology, 101, you work backwards on the curve. You know, stick the things in, get your temperatures, read the temperatures, look at your graph and say, oh, they were killed X number of hours ago. Well, if in fact Frankie had been killed at midnight, the temperature were taken at 1 o'clock, guess what? That would be a matter of evidence. But guess what happens to the curve? You get far enough down the curve, you cannot take a temperature and project time of death, because there is no gradient, there's no follow-up, it's basically flat.
Did they discuss that in the program today?
I don't know, I didn't hear the entire program. I may have it on tape, because I taped part of it I didn't have a chance to listen to. But
They didn't discuss that.
They did?
They did not.
Did not.
They did
Well,
not discuss the time of death.
Well, but the simple fact is that if the state police were not in on a criminal conspiracy, why did they stop the medical examiner from establishing, or possibly, because see, if Frankie had really been killed at 7 o'clock, then it wouldn't have made any difference at 1 a.m. because it would have already been off the chart. But at 6 o'clock in the morning, it was off the chart, because that was the 17th of January. The body was laying outside. What was the temperature on the 17th of January from 12:30 a.m. until 6 a.m.? It was freezing.
It wasn't outside then.
When those two hard-ups, they couldn't find the
What
body.
time, they brought the body inside sometime on New Year. What time did they find the body?
12:30 a.m. a.m. But according to the state's theory upon which Frank Gable was just convicted, he stabbed Frankie in the parking lot at about 7 p.m. the prior evening. And Peterson and Colley, because nobody could get a hold of Frankie on his pager. because he wore a pager. You know, and nobody could reach him. And so a lot of people were going around looking for him. Theoretically, Peterson and Colley went back to the Dome building trying to find Frankie and couldn't find him. And Peterson's specific testimony, because allegedly he was standing about as, about certainly as close as I am to the entry door, from the door on the other side of which the body of Michael Frankie was laying. And he couldn't see out the windows in the door because the light inside was brighter than the light outside, and it was acting like a mirror, and he couldn't see through the mirror. Except that the bottom right-hand corner of that mirror had been smashed by Frankie before he died. And he didn't notice a smashed corner of the door glass that he couldn't see through because it was a mirror. This is his verbatim testimony under oath.
What did the medical examiner say? What was the scenario? Like, was he trying to get to the body and they physically...
Yeah, he requested permission to do basic criminalistic analysis.
And did they have to restrain him? Was he pushing, or I mean, did he try to get some help behind him to say this is the law and I'm going to come in and do it anyway, or what?
Apparently there was no big fuss over it. It's just like, you know, why is it that John Kennedy's body was removed from Dallas when in fact there was no federal jurisdiction?
Because you would think the medical examiner, if anybody, would realize the importance of doing it.
Well, but there was no authority for the state police to take over control of the crime scene. To my knowledge, there was no statutory justification for the state police to take over the case, or the crime scene, or to do, I mean, I don't know what the legal foundation was for that, any more than, well, of course, actually, I guess there is a parallel, you know, in terms of the JFK case, because in fact, the way the U.S. government got the authorities of the state of Texas to release the Kennedy body to the Secret Service for flight to New York was the Secret Service pulled out his gun and said, "We're taking him."
In New York? In New York?
What did I say?
You said a flight to New York.
No, excuse me, Washington D.C. No, I mean, but literally the Secret Service did pull their gun on the Texas authorities to secure possession of the body for flight to Washington D.C. So your question is entirely appropriate, but I don't have an answer because I don't know.
Well, what I was wondering is whether, did this medical examiner, was he called into court? Was he questioned and examined about what happened exactly?
To my knowledge, he was not. But see, again, you see, you've got a defense that is refusing to defend. They actually threw the case. There's another this kind of spooky parallel here because Lee Harvey Oswald said, you know, in the hall of the Dallas police station, you know, I'm a patsy. Well, Frank Gable, after he was convicted, when he left the courtroom, said, "My lawyer dump trucked me." And according to my sources, Mr. Abel, who is obviously fundamentally misnamed, for name freaks is getting real strange out there.
Frankie, and Abel.
Yeah, it's real strange. In any event, my sources indicate that if Abel was not 3 sheets to the wind when he delivered his summation to the jury, he was doing a damn good impersonation of a guy who was stumbling drunk. And I was talking to another friend, and I said, well, you know, it's interesting, because if you're going to sell out your client, which is about the highest sin you can commit as an attorney, it would probably help if you were pretty well tanked when you did it. It kind of blunts the edge.
Is that on the video?
On which video?
Didn't they videotape the whole trial?
Well, not necessarily, because in point of fact, the way the camera was set up in the courtroom, it was immobile.
So you couldn't see the...
All they could do is they had a remote zoom, but there was no pan and tilt. It was totally passive. It was just like this. It was just sitting there. It had a remote zoom control on it, but it had no pan and tilt. And because I sat and watched the monitor, you know, and every now and then they, you know, move the lens in terms of, you know, the angle of view, but there was a lot of stuff you didn't get to see on the camera that you would see if you were in courtroom. So I don't know whether able summation was in fact recorded or not. I know it would have been recorded on audio because the whole place was set up with recording microphones, but I don't know whether or not it made it on the tape. That could be found out real easy. KOIN was the one doing the video.
Well, I'm just thinking about what the legislature just did with this 2% kicker, where they're supposed to return millions of dollars to the taxpayers, because there's a law in the book called the 2% kicker, right?
Well, yeah, there's a law.
And, you know, what is it? If receipts go over 2%, then the money has to be, that excess has to be returned to the taxpayers. And it seems to me that it's of a kind with what she was talking about, that, I mean, if the law is inconvenient, well, just simply
ignore it.
Simply ignore it. They simply, the legislature simply ignored the law and said, well, we repeal it. Well, they can, of course, repeal it for future, but the law, in fact, was on the books, and that money was supposed to have been returned. And I don't understand why people are not up in arms demanding the recall of any public official who is involved in anything illegal.
Up in arms. That hasn't happened in this country for such a long period of time. Do you realize that college students back in the 1870s, when they got seriously annoyed with the administration, would frequently turn the cannon on the commons around and load it and fire a round through the president's house?
I didn't know that.
Well, that was once upon a time fairly common in terms of collegiate discussion between administration and student body. The forms of communication have deteriorated through time. I mean, I remember them shooting at us like a bunch of bloody pigeons in the 60s and the 70s. I don't recall us ever having shot at them. And it's really ironic because according to Jefferson, he said that, you know, that the tree of liberty is very important, and it requires that it be watered.
Blood of patriots and tyrants alike.
It must be watered by the blood of patriots and tyrants. It is its natural manure.
Well, I think that would be an interesting topic for discussion as to why people are not
Why are we infra-punitive instead of extra punitive? Why is it we commit suicide instead of taking some SOB with us? Why is it we don't have the cancer commandos who, you know, if you're going to go, why don't you take the CEO of the company that gave it to you?
The easier battalion.
Yeah.
Well, why do you think that is? Do you think
Because we have turned into a bunch of absolute brainwashed garden slugs.
people are just kept so busy, or that they don't have the energy left to...
Everybody still owns a television set.
There's some truth to that.
Yeah, you know, all these reasons, you know, the education,
It's not mellow, it's just not mellow.
Well, the proposition, you know, that's one of the real ironies, because in many cases it seems to me we're replicating the 30s now in ways that I find real discomforting. We now have essentially a Supreme Court, whether this Afro-Aryan crypto-Nazi gets confirmed or not, is really a trivial issue. They've already got an absolute juggernaut on the Supreme Court that will in fact overturn any and all aspects of due process, the Bill of Rights, the concept of privacy, the proposition that the state ought to get its bloody nose out of people's private lives is being absolutely eradicated. In fact, the new crime bill that the fasciste in the Congress have cooked up is in fact going to make capital punishment universal throughout the United States, independent of state law. And in fact, they can prosecute people under federal law for a crime within a state and supersede state law, even though the state has a specific prohibition against capital punishment. They've added 50 new capital crimes to the statute books. The thing is, we are rolling back very, very rapidly into what I consider a whole new dark age. That's going to go past where Adolf Hitler intended to go, because I think this is a fundamental attack on the Enlightenment itself. I think that we are now going into a paradigm that has really not existed since the 14th century. And I do not view it with great enthusiasm, precisely because we now have no checks and no balances. We have a Supreme Court that is, if anything, the spear point of autocratic power of the elite of the state. And that state elite is not only going to own the government, it's going to own the people in sort of a neo-feudalism.
Techno-slavery.
Exactly. For instance, there was a driver for UPS, the place I was today, and he's got this electronic board, and he came trotting up, and I looked at this thing and I said, Jesus criminy, what is that? What happened to the pad and, you know, and pen? And he says, hey, this thing keeps a time log. They now have a computerized clipboard which you sign with a magic pen in this little LCD display window, and everything is literally time counted internally within, you know, the memory of this thing, and so the driver is now essentially a complete slave to this lousy little piece of electronics. Yeah.
2 states are passing legislation to try to control that on workers. It's considered to cause work-related stress. 2 states are actually working on controlling it.
And now, you know, hand problems, arm problems, shoulder problems. I know 2 people right now who, one is using conventional surgery, the other one's using you know, non-conventional treatment for serious damage to their ability to function. Just, you know, this one friend said she'd reach out and try and pick something up. She couldn't tell if she had it because she couldn't feel it. You know, so she was dropping things because she couldn't tell how hard she was grabbing it.
RPS, the UPS current adversary, they don't even have to write anything. They have a pen that does the exact same thing. They just rub it across all those barcodes, and they are always running. UPS are still kind of lackadaisical comparatively. RPS doesn't even deal with that big thing. They carry a pen that does the exact same thing. It's a little big, exact same thing.
It's a barcode reader.
RPS. I'm sorry.
What is that?
Rapid Partial Service.
Well, we may have a nation of cripples after how many...
Well, then you have it frontal to bother me. Why would it bother you if your rest of you goes to hell? You know?
Yeah.
With all this stuff happening, doesn't that make the Bill of Rights a revolutionary document once again?
It would seem to me that if you go back and you look at the preamble to the second Constitution, it says, that this Constitution is established in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare. It didn't say a damn thing about a $5 million book deal for wealthy generals. It doesn't say promote the welfare of generals. It says promote the general welfare. You know, and secure the blessings of liberty, etc. Now, is that a social contract or isn't it? Is it not a quid pro quo between the people and the government that is what the government is to do? And if it doesn't do that, well then there's what is called a breach of contract.
One of the things that I'm concerned about is that some of us have lived enough decades, you might say, that we remember how things ought to be or used to be, and
we're less like they are now than now.
We remember things that, I have a friend, for example, who's 10 years younger than I am, who hasn't felt the change as much as I have seen it, for example. And then I'm concerned about what about really younger folks, although there are some, I'm sure, who are very aware of this kind of thing. But if they haven't lived in a time when things, for example, I guess I'll bring up, there was a mention about flying on airlines. And some of us were talking about how it used to be, better service, that kind of thing. And a younger person said, well, why should it be any better than that?
You mean to say you used to be able to go into an airport and not go through a metal detector and have everything checked at your body cavities?
Right. And they're saying, well, why should you expect it any better than that? That's the way it is.
Well, what have you got to hide? You want to go to the courthouse, go through the metal detector. And make sure you take your pack of cigarettes out because it'll set off the beeper.
Will it?
Yes.
Oh, remind me to get some smokes.
So I'm getting concerned about that aspect of
But frauds adjust.
What's better?
People adjust to the level of repression. The proposition that the fact that you got people running around in the camouflage suits with automatic weapons shooting people and their dogs hardly raises a ripple. You know, and Chief Potter, you know, does a little aw shucks article in the Oregonian that explains to the Meadow Muffins how they really have a real tight control over the use of deadly force. They only kill people if they need to. And if they need to kill them, there's no limit to the number of bullets to be fired in pursuit of that straightforward objective. I.e., 32 rounds in one body is not too much.
Into the mentally disturbed woman, you mean?
No, she only got hit, let's see, what was it? 20 times out of 22 rounds.
Wow.
I'm talking about the quote-unquote hardened crack house that these guys in their Rambo outfits went in through the patio door. Boy, if I ever build a fortress, I am going to make damn sure I don't put patio doors on it. Anyway, so 3 of them walked in, and of course, anybody who has, you know, this kind of, it's like out of a movie. You have these weirdos and these, you know, fatigues with machine guns come busting into your house. What is your reaction going to be?
Spots of a drink.
Well, if you got a gun, you're going to reach for it. If you're halfway normal.
Yeah, they didn't announce their entry. They just shot the dogs and bust through the door, right? Didn't that happen?
5 kids.
They used different weapons to shoot the dogs because they were silenced with.
That's right.
Really? Silenced weapons.
Yep.
I thought they always had to give people a warning, you know, like, hey, you inside, this is the police, we're surrounding your house.
There was a law that just went down here last spring sometime early that said if the police believe that the people inside are dangerous, They can
They don't
enter
have to knock.
unannounced. They
They
can
don't
enter,
have
it's
to
a
knock.
no-knock, kick the door down.
And do not have to announce. They
And-
are police.
Yeah, and so it's, I mean,
So if you want to start a burglary ring and a robbery ring, get your camouflage duds and your automatic weapons and go around kicking in doors unannounced, because you can then pretend to be a cop.
No, you do it like the cops did it in Denver in the 60s. You just go in in plain clothes and burglarize the place.
Well, that's it.
And in
If you're
Seattle,
not there
in
to
Seattle
kill
in the
them.
70s. Remember that?
Well,
They'll reach
in the
right
case-
up to the chief of police.
Well, but
Just
yeah, I
plain
do.
clothes there.
But in the case of, say, the Panthers in Chicago, they actually did a systematic assassination because they had a blueprint of the house where people slept. And in fact, Clark, who was the second guy who was killed there?
Hampton?
Fred Hampton.
Yeah, Hampton and Clark. They had actual floor plans of where they were sleeping, and they had been administered a dose of heavy-duty downers prior to the operation. So in fact, they were fundamentally comatose at the time of the attack. Not only were they assassinated, they were drugged prior to the assassination, so they didn't even have a chance to roll over and grab a shotgun and return around. I mean, nothing. They were, I mean, you might as well have hogtied them, drug them out in the middle of the street and shot them in the head. It would not have been any more of a absolute cold-blooded, premeditated homicide.
Yeah, supposedly the guy who was their head of security had put something in their Kool-Aid, is what I heard.
That's right, that's what I'm saying.
That sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Well,
remember Jonestown?
Yes. Incidentally, you know where Jones got his start?
Fidel Castro, right?
Oh, Jesus. No, Indianapolis, Indiana, head of the Human Rights Commission. Give me a break.
You know, I know it was a joke, I heard Tom Valentine say that. He has to
Oh.
call him. The seminary.
Oh, that was a joke, thank God. But listen, you gotta be real careful with jokes in this field, because sometimes it turns out it ain't a joke. It gets real weird. I mean, some of the connections, I mean, for instance, Harry Martin, the guy who is the editor of the Napa Sentinel, who has been breaking a lot of the stories on CIA drug involvement and whatnot, who's now involved with the story about October Surprise involving Russbacker. Turns out he, a few years ago, back in the mid-'80s, was working down in Silicon Valley with a magazine called, I think it was Defense Electronics, with a colonel who was subsequently indicted by the U.S. government for organizing arms to Iran, and that was, you know, the whole EDA case, where Martin has got all these connections to all these people who were subsequently indicted in Iran arms smuggling, and now he is no longer, you know, connected with that, but he's off in Napa, you know, and you've got all these funny backdoor connections between all these people, and now, of course, there's all kinds of, you know, other, it gets, that's why it's real hard to make a joke like that without somebody going, oh yeah? Oh yeah?
What I don't understand, the thing that's completely evades me in this country is, I'm sure you've had the same experience I've had, is that we're all kinds of people who used not even to talk to each other. Different kinds of folks are now talking to each other, saying the same thing, and going like
Is
this.
now being advertised, his secret team is now being advertised in the spotlight. Well, Fletcher Prouty is the guy who wrote The Secret Team about how the CIA places agents in all of the other agencies. Is everybody familiar with the book and the thesis? That, you know, every espionage agency spies on every other espionage agency. I mean, the FBI spies on the CIA, and vice versa. Remember the case where the Joint Chiefs of Staff had agents planted in Kissinger's office and the White House, you know, and they were spying on Kissinger and Nixon was spying on them, and I mean, you have, I mean, everybody's, you know, at least an agent for somebody, and sometimes they're doubling or tripling, and that's basically normal when you get into a society where, in fact, all of the stuff that you learn in school about how the society is supposed to work is complete crap. Absolute, complete, unremitting nonsense. That doesn't make any difference whether you vote or not. They'll stuff the computer for you. Well, you don't have a clue what the vote really was. Nobody has any idea other than the people who are controlling the computers. I mean, they have been stuffing ballot boxes when they were using paper. You don't think they can stuff them when it's electronic?
It's happened here in Multnomah County for years. You know, every election practically, there is a breakdown in the computer, and we have to wait for results until it gets fixed.
Which means until they find out what the count is down count, so they know how much to finesse it.
I guess, pardon me, I kind of digressed there, but I guess what I keep wondering about, Ace, is this. What's going to happen if and when all these different kinds of folks who are now looking at each other and saying, yeah, what a bunch of bourgeois this is that's going on now, ever figure it out and get together?
If that happens, it's going to be a case of serious heartburn for the elite. But I would be willing to bet you at this point that's already occurred to them. They said, what happens if these nutcakes get together? Well, all right, let's set up, you know, 82 different saviors. I mean, we have Lyndon LaRouche who will save us.
What's that?
We have Lyndon LaRouche who will save us. We have the Reverend Sun Myung Moon who will save us. We have Elizabeth Clare Prophet who will save us.
Jay Rockefeller says the poor people need help.
John D. Rockefeller III.
Isn't that amazing? He actually said that.
Oddly enough, he's right.
He said that.
Well, but so did Jack Campbell. But so did Jack Campbell.
I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. He actually said that.
Well, but so does the chairman of Honeywell.
With a straight face, by the way.
They don't, look, you got to remember, when you have a hereditary aristocracy, the humor gene gets lost.
I couldn't say something funny like that with a straight face.
Well, but he could because he doesn't have a humor gene. He does not see the humor in it. I mean, it's like the dumb gene, you know, is dominant, you know, in other people. I mean, that you also have these genes that sort of drop out. The humor gene just goes away in the elite level. Can you imagine what would happen if you had a press conference with the Twisted Shrub and he actually had a humor gene? He would listen to himself and crack up about every other sentence. He would just howl. The man is absolutely hysterically funny if you really listen to him.
Do they really believe they're on BS?
Well, that's my question. I mean, I really can't tell because I think it is what Orwell developed as the idea of doublethink and newspeak, where you always keep the lie one jump ahead of the truth. I mean, George Bush has said that he wants to be the environmental president, the education president, the sweetness and light president, the, what was it, 1,000 points of light, you know, that's you know, a metaphor that is so egregiously pompous and profane coming from him that is utterly bizarre. I mean, it's just simply, you know, that first of all, that came from, wasn't it Peggy Noonan?
Yes, it was.
Yes, I mean, she was the scriptwriter for The Twisted Shrub, the Apostle of the Evil Empire, and before that, Gunga Dan.
She's quite good. She's quite good. She's
Peggy Noonan, however, she's as good as she is still as crazy as the proverbial shithouse rat. Because she really believes that if you give more to those that already own half of everything that can be owned, is somehow going to be better for the people who have nothing.
Them who has.
They know how to take care of it. Like,
Yeah, for instance, they know how to take care of it, like Milton Friedman and his lovely wife, Milty and Rose. They can discuss the issue of what do you do with a spare $10,000 rattling around in the dresser drawer. I mean, do you put it into the stock market? Do you invest it in precious metals? Do you? And he concluded that if you want to buy a diamond, that's what you ought to do, even though you aren't sure of an appreciation that would be consistent with money market funds or T-bills. You have an aesthetic appreciation, which has a validity that has as much import on a spiritual level as the interest would have on a...
A's? He knows, you know poor folks, he knows rich folks. The people he knows, lots of them, and there are lots and lots of them who have spare 10 grand. So why should that shock you so much?
It only shocks me because I remember Marie Antoinette.
Give them food stamps.
She said...
Well, but a lot of people have 10 grand lying around, that's...
And if there are any of them here, we're open to contributions to defray the heating, lighting, and other bills.
So you screwed up and you got to know poor people.
There's an old joke about God must have, loved poor people. He made so many of them. The fact is that Marie Antoinette was not being a smartass when she said, "Let them eat cake." She was being a Milton Friedman. She did not understand that there was no bread to eat and there was no cake either. She was judging the world from her frame of reference, which was that if you had no bread, it was because the bakers were busy doing cakes. And when they got through doing the cakes and the pastries and the rolls and the rest of it, then they would go back and bake some bread. It wasn't as though she was being a smartass. She was not being cruel. She was being a Milton Friedman. And when Jack Kemp says that the society cannot survive in a duality of abject poverty and great affluence, he's not whistling Dixie. He is saying what every analyst has said ever since anybody got around to analyzing, that if you have vast disproportionality of wealth, power, status in the society, eventually things get real rocky. Now, Hamilton, who is the most monstrous bastard ever produced in this country, he exceeds in terms of mendacity even the Milton Friedmans. But he was not stupid. And he understood things, and he understood them with great insight. His argument was that you could only rule either by power or by interest. And if you're going to use power, which means force, you have to have a comparatively closed system or it isn't going to work. And his argument for establishing this tripartite pseudo checks and balances system to protect the ruling elite from everybody else, which is like, does everybody know the bit about minority and majority and what that meant at the time of the founding of the Second Republic, and what was this great fear held by Madison and Hamilton and Washington and the others about the majority?
Well, my understanding of that is that there was a conflict between whether their order was more important than justice. Does that run into the same line of thought that you're
Well, it's parallel, but there were debtors and there were creditors. The minority were creditors. The majority were debtors. That's why they had to overthrow the First Republic. because 6 of the 13 state legislatures were under the control of the debtor party.
Wow.
And they passed a bill called a stay law. A stay law was, there will be no foreclosures for failure to make payments upon mortgage, either principal or interest. The creditors were just livid.
Small wonder.
They were just absolutely apoplectic. I mean, this violated the sanctity of contract. Now, what is it the Second Republic did? It established the sanctity of contract. It also provided absolute power of the purse and power of the sword to enforce contract. At the time of the founding of the Second Republic, or the coup d'etat against the First Republic, or the counter-revolution against the First Republic, or, if you will, anticipatory fascism as opposed to democracy. There's a lot of ways of working this out semantically, but basically what it did is it made damn sure the creditors ran it and ran it forever. Because if you look at the way the system is structured, it is impossible for the majority, to wit the debtors, to ever achieve power within the national government. Which, in case you're interested, the draft of the Constitution of 1787, before it got to the Committee of Style, every place you find the word federal, you found the word national. It was a national government. The Committee of Style changed one word throughout the document. Where it said national, they changed it to federal, because that sugar-coated the pill, and it went down much better. The purpose was brilliant. Hamilton and Madison just came up with the most brilliant system ever devised to ensure the perpetuity of the rule of that minority that they loved so diligently: the rich, the well-born, the affluent, and the creditors. That is the minority to be protected. And the only minority that has ever been protected in this particular country. If you stop and reflect upon it, what other minority has ever been protected with the diligence and the enthusiasm and the alacrity of the rich and the creditors? Not a single one, I assure you. You can scale through all of the history for 215 years, if you will, and never will you find any minority more jealously protected than the damn creditors. Of course, how is it that someone becomes a creditor? Well, somehow they get that which is produced by others, right? Do you think the Rockefellers make their own income from work? By the sweat of their brow, they go out and wrest wealth from the planet? Good God, what a bizarre proposition. They're born. Yeah.
Even if the rich were to put in 16-hour days, why are they worth $71 million a year? And why is their rent
Because they
worth
said
so
so.
much?
Because
No,
they
but,
said so.
I mean, because some people, maybe they do work. Maybe they're workaholics and they're rich. But the fact
Go to
is,
Acapulco, you can find
well, I'm not denying that.
by the...
I'm just saying, isn't it also a matter of why is their labor worth so much and
Because
somebody
they
who
said
works
so.
just as hard? Well, I mean, that's an important point, I think.
Well, but since we live in an autocracy, the autocrat gets to say what's cool, right?
Okay, but it's true not only of rich. I mean, it's true of, the woman that cleans a building compared to a lawyer that earns $150,000 a year, or a teacher who earns $20,000 and a doctor who earns $200,000. I mean, there's only so much labor a person can put out.
You mean to say that nobody has more than 24 hours a day, no matter how hard they work at it?
Exactly. So why is theirs worth so much time?
Well, because they said so. Again, you're raising an absolutely appropriate question. What is the standard of judgment that would determine that One person, using Iacocca as the example, because his income in 90 was $8,000 an hour. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for the full year. Now, $8,000 an hour, that is not a question of did he earn it. There is no way in the world that anybody earns $8,000 an hour in terms of what people earn, say, changing diapers, which to me is fairly onerous occupation, or, you know, working, you know, a garbage route.
Or the lawn for $4 a week.
Or mowing lawns. I mean, there are lots of things. I mean, for instance, if you want the people who I think really do some of the most important work in the country, it's probably the agricultural workers who permit us to eat. I can't think of anything a hell of a lot more important. I mean, first is oxygen, second is water, and third is food on the priority list. And the people who provide food is not, you know, the merchants of grain.
Did anybody see the other evening on TV, they had a segment about a farmer who was probably going to have to fold, and he went to the bank for a loan and he was denied money. And so then instead they thought about what they could do. So they decided they were going to print their own, quote, money. It was like coupons or whatever you want to call it. And then they went to customers that they had and they said, you know, we will give you this document, that this coupon or whatever, and at the end of the summer you will get your 20 pounds of potatoes. And so they saved their farm that way.
Well, I'll tell you, if that works more than once, there's going to be a serious case of the government shutting them down, because technically that's right on the borderline of counterfeiting.
Well, no, that's a barter system. That's
people can sell futures.
They're getting real hard on barter systems too.
And they talked about several different businesses that, you know, couldn't get money through those normal channels of bank loans, but who were going out and getting it through people this way, individuals that they knew was change.
The reason why we're going to have a coup is precisely because we're being driven to extremities. Pat Buchanan is going to have his wet dream. The Supreme Court will in fact show up with swastikas. They will rule poverty a crime, and they will then have a blank check to lock up anybody who does not make $60K a year, and hold them indefinitely on the grounds that if they haven't committed a crime, it's only fortuitous, and probably they've committed several and simply hasn't been caught. The same philosophy my father had used whenever he paddled me and I didn't have it coming. It caught up with me for the times when he should have it.
Yeah, just in case I missed one.
Well, I mean, that's sort of a quasi-fascist theory, but if you apply it on a social level, I think we will have a system that is some amalgam of Brave New World, 1984, you know, and half a dozen other utopian visions that are... What? I missed what you said.
I just was another thought here. I agree with you about the agricultural support.
Well, they deserve a whole lot.
Because...
but they don't get it.
No, and more farmers are being put out, and it concerns me, because then what will happen, we should think about this, we would then have co-op or corporate farming, and our food they could charge if they wanted. And I think...
That's the whole purpose of monopoly,
that's right,
is to drive any and all possible competition out, because what you develop initially an oligopolistic system where you have a concentration of a few groups operating in collusion. If the antitrust laws that were passed around the turn of the century were enforced today, you would essentially destroy the entire corporate system. If the Sherman and the Clayton Antitrust Acts were actually enforced today, seriously, and not the kind of BS that is being done, but I mean real enforcement, you would virtually destroy the entire corporate system as it exists today, under the existing law. Because, as was mentioned earlier, whenever the law is inconvenient to the elite that rules, they ignore it. I mean, they simply ignore it. Selective law enforcement, you know, as a part of the legal process.
I'm familiar with the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, but not with the Clayton.
Oh dear, I don't have a book in front of me, and I haven't looked it up for years.
1895, Sherman.
1895?
Yeah, Clayton, I don't know.
Well, there were the two that were right about the same time, and they worked in conjunction to try and break up the trusts. And that's what it was called then, was, in fact, Teddy Roosevelt, was one of the true all-time humbugs, liars, fools, and general hypocrites, was the one who called himself a trust buster. Well, please remember that we got into the First World War from the guy who was voted in on the peace ticket, Wilson. You know, and if that's too far back in ancient history, remember LBJ, you know, vote for LBJ and save us from war in Vietnam. That's what we did.
I mean, Goldwater would.
We voted for LBJ to keep us out of war in Vietnam, and boy, oh boy, did he ever.
We were in war, and the U.S. was involved in war in Vietnam, but remember they smeared Goldwater,
Yeah.
because Goldwater said that if he was honest, the damn fool, yeah, if he were elected
More or
president,
less.
he would bomb Haiphong Harbor near Hanoi, and people said, oh my God, we have to vote for LBJ, we can't have a crazy person like this. And what did LBJ do? One of the first things?
Bomb Haiphong.
Haiphong Harbor. You betcha.
Including some Russian jets. Well, but again, you know, you've got to start integrating this whole body of information. You've got to look at it as a totality and not approach it as discrete, isolated events. I mean, when you wake up in the morning, you've got to wake up with a memory. You know, I mean, the puppies wake up in the morning and they go, you know, golly gee whiz, a whole new world out there, and they just have to go out and run around in circles and investigate everything. I saw a great cartoon the other day, you know, it was puppy thought, you know, and there's this puppy on the end of the leash, you know, and he's going, what's that, what's that, what's that, gotta pee, what's that, what's that, what's that, gotta pee, what's that, what's that, what's that, gotta pee, you know. Well, that's the way most people in the United States live.
And I have another parable that it goes right along with that. Here's the cartoon. It shows a cat sitting in the corner of a room, staring at the corner. And then in the bubble that shows what the cat is thinking is a picture of a cat sitting in a corner, staring at the corner. The title is Catland. And that's the other half of the people that are thinking that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Although my approach to all of this also has slightly heretical approaches, in that I remember the two cats sitting in the corner of the room, and the entire room is full of mice, and all the mice are all organized in ranks and rows, and they're all standing there looking at the cats, and the one cat says to the other, God, they got organized, we may have to negotiate. Well, but that's exactly what the government cannot permit. If the people of the United States recognize that they have a common interest with everybody else in this country based upon the fact that they are debtors. I don't give a damn who you sleep with, I don't give a damn, you know, whether you're short, tall, black, white, I don't care what your plumbing is, I don't care what your, you know, personal God might be, if any. You have a common interest called survival. And if survival is not the most important issue for you, then basically you might as well be a puppy, because you're just going to be out there and you're going to be roadkill. You're going to run in front of the first truck that comes down the road because you have never learned a thing. And the problem that the government has is making sure we all stay puppies.
Well, I understand what you're getting at here with the Supreme Court and with the government's head of the executive branch, that it won't then be necessary for them to have a formal announcement that the Bill of Rights has been suspended.
Oh, God, no. Oh, God, no.
Is that right?
Oh, heavens, no. Please remember, the people went into the gas chamber with a bar of soap. It was a shower. Please remember, you do not tell the frog what you're doing to him, because that would upset the frog. You know, you don't tell people that you're about to murder them. You look at what's going on in this country, if it's not genocidal, what's going on in the world. That's what we started out with, the whole thing with the oil field fires in Kuwait. It was the U.S. that set them off. It was the United States that was arming Iraq and Iran through the entire 80s. I mean, we were arming, manipulating both sides. We were providing quote-unquote intelligence to Iran, to Iraq. We have material on Ollie North meeting with Iranians talking about how the U.S. is going to help Iran overthrow Saddam Hussein. At the same time, we're working with the Iraqis to kill as many Iranians as possible and providing the poison gas, the missile technology. We're providing tow missiles to the Iranians, while in fact through South Africa we're shipping arms to Iraq to have the tow missiles fired at them. I mean, we're talking about a government that is so evil, so lethal, so mendacious, so fundamentally corrupt, that we make every archetype of evil in human history synthesized look like a pack of amateurs.
Yes, because now we have the writers and the advertising and TV and all this that
The spin doctors!
package it.
Very well done. It's technologically very good.
Oh yeah, listen, you got to give Goebbels credit for inventing the big lie, but you see, the people who turn it into a retail consumer product, are the people who really took the fundamental concept and made it a real market item. I mean, did you happen to catch the NPR program on censorship and the Middle East war?
Oh, yeah.
Cokie Roberts, the moderator. You know who her daddy was?
Yes. Hail Bob.
Hale Boggs. What commission was he on?
Hale Boggs, who disappeared in Alaska?
The very same.
That they could never find?
He was a member of the Warren Commission. And he just before, it was a 160-mile flight in Alaska, and it was a FAA flight plan filed, clear weather. They still haven't found the plane. Just before his plane disappeared, he had talked to a reporter about the need to reopen the Kennedy assassination case because, in fact, they'd been lied to.
Are we talking about the same country that who says that the government says that they can have satellites so sophisticated now they can read license plate numbers?
I want a refund.
I'm serious.
No, I'm serious. Either we have just been ripped off for $8 trillion because the garbage doesn't work, or the garbage does work and they're lying. Take your choice. They can either find the plane or I want a refund. Well, they don't want to give me a refund and they want me to believe it works.
I think both statements are true.
What, we deserve a refund and it does work?
No, some of the stuff works some of the time, and
Some of the time it
some of the
doesn't.
stuff doesn't work.
It
Well-
depends if they want it to work, I imagine.
I would say that there is selective efficiency. Although it's kind of interesting, Ramsey Clark must be having some effect because he is now being trashed in the New York Times, and he's being trashed by John Judas, who is the editor of In These Times.
That's his actual name, is it?
Yeah.
No, you're kidding.
J-U-D-I-S.
Oh, Judas. Oh, spell that one. That would be too much. He's the Washington Post.
I
just automatically flashed the other way.
Yeah, I know, I mean, but that's the way it is, you know, I mean, it's getting, when you come to the end of the millennia, you know, the name freaks, you know, pig out.
That's too much, it's actually a guy's name.
Where was he crashing Ramsey Clark? In the New Republic, which is now a espionage conduit.
Who's it trashing about?
Oh, well, for instance, you know who one of Ramsey Clark's clients is? Lyndon LaRouche.
No.
Yes. On the silly proposition, according to Clark, that even a nutcake deserves a legal defense.
This is mad speak.
Well, but I'm just telling you that, well, if you want the actual fact is, Lyndon LaRouche should be put against the wall, not just locked up for credit card fraud, because he is a complete megalomaniac and a government espionage operative who has been screwing the people of this country since he infiltrated the SWP under the brilliant pseudonym of Lynn Marcus.
Are they one and the same?
Yeah, Lynn Marcus is Lyndon LaRouche.
No.
You didn't know that?
No.
Oh! Well, but when the deal was cut between the SWP and the Federales about, you know, because they got a $250,000 cash settlement from the U.S. government.
Right.
Well, you know, that amounted to $1 per wiretap, black bag job, mail cover, and agent planted.
Lynn Marcus and Lyndon LaRouche
Are the same person.
Are you sure of this?
Absolutely positive.
Was the guy a fink all along?
Yes. But the deal, they finally cut a deal, and the SWP did not require the U.S. government to name who the 2,000 plus infiltrators were by name.
You mean somebody in the SWP didn't figure it out?
The last I read in the SWP, the explanation for why Lynn Marcus left the SWP to found the new labor committee, whatever it was, and he's now gone on with the Schiller Institute and the, he's now publishing a thing called the New Federalist, and he has the Executive Intelligence Review, which is a large part of the footnotes for Barbara Honecker in October Surprise, which...
Well, why are the anti-Bush administration then, if that's the case? I mean, they're...
Listen, I don't have answers to a lot of these questions. I just raise the connections and show you the cast. This is a play we're at. We're trying to figure it out together.
Was Lynn Marcus, a.k.a. Lyndon LaRouche, a government fink at that time?
That's my reference.
Or did he simply tumble?
No, I think
later?
he's been an agent since day one, but that's my personal opinion.
Okay.
Was LaRouche, was he in the Workers' World Party too?
The Workers' which?
Workers' World Party?
Boy, I'm not sure on that one. I mean, because did you ever see Monty Python's The Life of Brian? You remember the Palestinian Front for Liberation, the Liberation Front for Palestine, and the Palestine Liberation Front, and and they were all fighting each other, while they were, here's the Roman legionnaires standing there, and they're all, hacking and cutting each other, and they're all supposedly trying to overthrow the Roman occupation. I mean, you do know that they stole that from Mediterranean Cafe in Berkeley, circa 1968. I mean, they sat in there with a tape recorder and recorded all these nutcakes in the Med on Telegraph Avenue discussing how they were going to overthrow the government, and then they just transposed it to, I mean, literally, I swear some of those conversations I had heard before in Berkeley. I mean, it was the same kind of hysterical, infantile, ahistorical nonsense. So, I don't know. he could have been a member of 28 different outfits.
Lynn Marcus and Lyndon LaRouche are one and the same.
According to the latest official groupthink in SWP, the reason he left is he couldn't deal with feminism.
That's a tough one.
Listen, that's their explanation, not mine. I read it in their paper. They said he couldn't deal with feminism because he was a chauvinist pig, and that's why he had to leave. Never occurred to them he'd been an agent since day one. They're too damn dumb to figure that out. Either that or, as is usual, half the people who didn't leave are still agents. You got to remember, J. Edgar Hoover had absolute control of CPUSA by the time he died in '72 because his agents had seniority. Not only did they have seniority, they paid their dues on time. If it hadn't been for FBI member dues paying, the CP would have gone under. You just stop and think about it. It's obvious. While he was writing Masters of Deceit, he was in charge. You've got to have a sense of humor to watch the play and enjoy it. Now, who do you think is running half the bloody damn outfits in this country right now? You really think Elizabeth Clare Prophet just dropped down from Venus with her... why do they always channel some aristocrat? Why isn't it some, pig farmer? A chore woman, or, I mean, it's always a prince,
Royalty is
a guru. What are we talking about? Elizabeth Clare Prophet, who pretends to have a channel
Speaking
off
of
to...
names, that's a great name.
The bomb shelter lady up in Montana?
Yeah, right next to Yellowstone. I mean, I just bought a little old ranch up there about, 15,000 acres at top. And then, of course, I mean, they just said, oh, well, I guess we need about, a dozen Barrett 50s. Everybody know what a Barrett 50 is? You know, Richard. Where did Richard disappear to? You want to tell him what a Barrett 50 is instead of me hogging the mic?
Oh, it's a 50 caliber sniper rifle capable of putting a round about a 1-inch square in 1,000 yards.
Square round.
And they've got how many of those?
Dozen!
Oh.
Well, they're not only that, you see, they happen to be semi-automatic clip fed. So you don't have to wait a long time for round 2 if you're sniping people at 1,000 yards. They bought a dozen of them.
Are we talking about expensive toys?
The bullet on one of those is about that long. It's 1/2 inch diameter. The slug's about this long, and it's ballistically stable in a target zone of 1 inch square at 1,000 yards. Other than that, it's not very impressive. In fact, it could literally punch a hole through your head from here to the West Hills.
Well, now, you say that she's an aristocrat?
She channels an aristocrat.
She has this woo-woo off somewhere who's been deceased for 13 centuries. Does anybody know the real scoop on her BS?
There's a mixture of New Age religion and Christianity, and they're glommed it all together. And
there's this wacko she's allegedly channeling from.
I don't know who the entity is.
What is her particular background?
Well, she basically has a Christian background, but there's a New Age slant to it, and she's leading these people and convincing them that there's an Armageddon, a nuclear Armageddon, and they've all built these bomb shelters.
It was all supposed to happen, wasn't it, June 90?
Well, yeah.
Bomb shelters, because the county perverts were going to sneak over to the North Pole.
But then they had the diesel spill into the Yellowstone River, so they had to postpone that, I guess.
To say that she's Christian doesn't tell me much about her background.
I didn't say she was Christian. I said she is a con artist, but I don't think she's a Lone Ranger. I don't think she's an auto.
Where was she born? Is she from a wealthy family?
Well, I don't know, because finding out what her actual pedigree is kind of difficult.
She probably tied in with the Moonies.
wouldn't rule it out, but the movies come out of the KCIA, which was created by the CIA, which was created by the Galen apparatus in collusion with, Sullivan and Cromwell, who were the attorneys for the IG Farben and the rest of the Nazi apparatus. So I mean, we're working now on a globalized system of sort of transnational monarchical fascism, which, is something that is so arcane and nebulous and diffuse that everybody would rather go, like the puppy, what's that, gotta be, what's that, I mean, everybody's gonna be a puppy than try to deal with reality, because reality's getting real scary.
Somebody's got to.
If you're looking for scenarios, I mean, one scenario is that you could be a representative of some elite faction and they're gonna have this safe haven should they run to it.
Yeah, I just think she's one of about 800 different, shills that's being run. I think that the mighty Wurlitzer has millions of tubes, and it's just playing the keys. And the thing is, if you want to keep the people under control, give them every possible option to control the paranoia. For instance, you saw, I didn't bring along a copy of the PUFA, the warning against the fake rapture that is going to be run by the trilateralists and the Bilderbergers and the Rockefellers and the little gray-nosed aliens from Alpha Reticuli who are living in Nevada.
What are you on about now?
I am telling you what was in a flyer that came from PUFA.
I don't know if you smoke tobacco, but if you smoke some...
I always saw tobacco. I want to go out coherent.
Dead but coherent.
I'd rather be coherent for 50 years than incoherent for 60. Anybody can be incoherent in perpetuity. This society breeds them. It's like, leaving old tires around, when it's time for mosquitoes.
What about these Nintendo games? They occupy people a great deal.
It's a conspiracy. It is.
I myself have never hardly seen one, much less played one. I mean,
Well, you just saw one. It was called the Gulf War.
Speaking of which, are you going to have another one?
Yeah.
Because
look, we're not ever going to quit until there aren't any, if you'll excuse the expression, sand niggers left. We're going to kill them all.
But I mean, they're making noises again about this.
Look, we're not leaving. We're killing people in the Middle East until we don't have a problem controlling the resources. This is a war for resources and depopulation. Right now, if you look at Africa, by the end of this decade, 50% of the people will be dead. That's no longer a matter of if, it's a matter of fact. They are already infected with AIDS. There is already such a massive destabilization economically, environmentally, and politically, and socially throughout all sub-Saharan Africa and the Horn of Africa that we already can project minimum death rates of 50% from 1980 from 1990 to the year 2000. 50% will be dead, period. Mark my words at this point. I absolutely guarantee you. Well, because in fact, what is the period of time for AIDS to incubate? 8 to 10 years.
Well,
We
that's
don't
what
know.
we've been
The
told.
outside is 8 to 10 years.
We've been told that, but who knows what it is.
Oh, well, okay, but I'm just going on the basis of what is known now. We don't have to speculate beyond, what is known right now. If you follow the reports from the World Health Organization, the United Nations, UNESCO, the report that just came out of the International AIDS Conference in Italy, you're going to be looking at 50% mortality rate in Africa by the end of the decade, and that's absolutely already wired in. It is hardwired. It is not a question of will it.
You're talking about the death of hundreds of millions of...
I am talking about that because we, in fact, under Reagan and Bush, have engaged in absolute final solution per the Nazis under the rubric of a right to life. The right to life has become the latest subterfuge for genocide. Precisely because the way, in fact, you destroy a population is you overdrive the population in terms of the environmental carrying capacity of their ecosphere, and then what you get is you get a progressive gap between population and ecological carrying capacity. And what happens is it's just like your good middle class who is now looking at a situation where, golly gee whiz, costs are going up, income is not. In real constant dollars, if you're making the same amount now that you were 10 years ago, you're making 50% in terms of real dollars that you were 10 years ago. So therefore, what you're doing is you're actually having a declining income in terms of purchasing power while prices are in real dollars going up. So you have a progressive gap. What do you fill in the gap with to maintain your quote-unquote standard of living? You fill it in with credit. Well, what do you fill the gap in between people who are exceeding the carrying capacity of their biosystem and a degrading biosystem? Because you have a population acceleration, you have a decline in the carrying capacity. What you do is you eat your seed corn. You inject fixes. You inject aid from the United States. You inject surplus wheat. You inject all sorts of things to prop up the disequilibrium that is becoming progressively less sustainable.
How do you connect that with AIDS?
Because AIDS is part of a total, coherent, structured system. Because, in fact, what we're dealing with are people who read the Global 2000 report not in terms of a caution how not to create genocide, but took it as a pattern of how, in fact, genocide could be done on a level of sophistication where nobody would even notice, except for a few wackos who don't spend their life running around going, what's that, gotta pee, what's that, gotta pee.
Are you talking about an intentional development of some sort of bacteria?
You are catching on. That's exactly what I'm saying. Fort Detrick, Maryland, specifically, if you want to know where it was invented and where was it prototyped, it was prototyped at the Ortag Rocket Research Site in Zaire, which never, ever tested any rockets.
Except the joke's on them because they're not going to survive either.
Why not that?
How?
Why not the antidote?
Why not that? It's 97% specific to target populations.
However, population
How does it tell
doesn't
poor people from rich?
Because it happens to be that HIV-3 is a symptom of, not the cause of. In point of fact, if you go back to Remedial Biology 1, if you have found the cause of a disease, then all people with a disease will have the pathogen, right?